Was overseas during the war, and when I came back from my last trip through Germany, I got a note from my superior in Washington that Justice Jackson, who knew me slightly, was one of the people that he was calling to see if they would want to go on his staff. This was just at the end of the war in Europe, and the Japanese war was still on. I could see right away, I could see as soon as the thing crumbled, that there was nothing on what I was doing that would still be going on in Germany. But I was of two minds about getting out of the army until the whole thing was over. So I wrote back that I want to come back and see and think about it before I give you an answer. Well, I went back and first went and saw my immediate superior in the Pentagon building, Colonel McCormick. This is all basically intelligence work, and told him that if the Japanese war was still on, was there anything I could do over there? And he said, well, Telford, if you really want to, perhaps we could find something for you to do. I guess we can. But really, you really not necessary. And anyhow, he said, I know damn well from what I've been reading that this war won't last more than about 4 weeks, 6 weeks maybe. Well, there wasn't any reason to go out if that was what was going to happen. So I then decided to go with Jackson, and I guess it was probably close to the middle of June when I finally signed up. So I didn't know Murray Bernays during the 1944 period when he was, as you say, a fountain of new ideas. I would not put it quite as strongly as you have. For one thing, the matter of war and whether starting a war, aggressive war, should be made a matter in this pulling together the whole thing. That Murray Bernays had nothing to do with. It's not at all known. I have it in my book, but I don't think there's anything in print about it. That the person who brought that up and put it through was Willie Chandler. Like all the others, he was a New York lawyer, New York City lawyer, and he was the one who went to Stimson and pushed him on the idea of making that a part of it. And when Stimson was a very good friend of his, he was well received, but Stimson's reply was, well, that's an awful thing I'd very much like to do, Charlie, but I think you've gone a little further than that we can get away with. Well, he was able to run around left field and with a friend of his who had close relations with Roosevelt, got memoranda to Roosevelt, and it was Roosevelt who then made the first move and ordered Stimson to include that in the basket of things. And I would say myself that one thing is probably more important than the two things that Bernays put together. However, he was a very thoughtful and a guy you could think, certainly could think up things. Did you ever see him?
Bernays?
Yeah.
No.
He looked very sallow, and he never looked to me to be a well man. And I worked with him and his group there for about 2 weeks only before Jackson decided it was high time to get overseas and go, and Bernays went with him. I was told I had been overseas since 1930 to 42, and I didn't want to go back immediately. I had family here in Washington, actually. And so he told me to take charge of the staff in Washington, while he and the others went over there. And by the time I got over there, which was just after the charter was signed, August 8th about, it was plain to me as soon as I saw Bernays that he was he didn't look like a well man, he didn't look at all like a happy man. And within about 4 days, he vamoosed, went back to New York. So my area of direct contact with Bernays was, as you see, rather pinched. So I don't know as much about all that. I've read everything I can find about it, but I think the way I put it in the book is that he was a very imaginative man and thought of things that added a great deal to what was happening there, but that he wasn't as good at making things go as thinking things up. And other men that were in some ways stronger and pushing more pushed him out.
Yeah. There is something of a conflict between Justice Jackson and Wild Bill Donovan, usually explained in things I've read, different approaches to the trial, Jackson being more inclined to a documentary prosecution and Donovan being more inclined to something more dramatic by way of witnesses.
Yeah.
Also, he fools around with Gehring on a possible plea bargaining, it seems like, and that this upsets Jackson and eventually he leaves. But beyond those obvious factors leading to their conflict, is there something more? Is there something in the personalities of these men? Is there just not enough room at Nuremberg for two such people?
I don't think it was just that. If they'd seen eye to eye, I think that they would have continued to work. I don't think, on that basis, I don't think that Donovan would have tried to push Jackson out. And he was the one who came forward to help Jackson, who had to put together a new bunch of people, and helped a great deal in putting that together. But he was still, for a period of time, still on the OSS. And there was a considerable period when he just wasn't around. And then he did have very different ideas about how to proceed. Again, I was inclined myself to agree with Donovan that there should be more. Jackson wanted, so far as possible, to do it all with the documents. In this, he was pushed by Colonel Story, a man who didn't know how to say documents. very, very texty. The documents. And he had this idea that you could have a self-proving showing. There was another word in there, self-proving something or other, by which he meant that you really wouldn't have to testify at all, that you would put your evidence together and present it to the court, and away we go. And indeed, one of the things that he was, when Jackson and he got together, Jackson and Satori got together, which would have been around the middle of October. They just fitted like a glove in this idea of the self-proving brief, the self-proving brief.
Right.
It just wouldn't work at all. And Story made some very bad, but let me backtrack a little bit. The very opening of the trial and Jackson's statement, I think, is not better by anybody that has written any law in this century. It's the most marvelous piece of writing, both in its, what's in it and the way it's put. But to my rather astonishment, as the trial went on, it became increasingly apparent to me that he was not all that good a courtroom lawyer. He had been very good as a Solicitor General when he was doing the appellate work and arguing before the Supreme Court. But he wasn't quick in dealing with things that are unexpected in a courtroom. And he was likely to defy, that's why he had that trouble with jury. Anybody who is well crafted in the courtroom. So it is true that Goering had it over with him on one particular thing. Well, a good trial lawyer would brush that off and get onto something as quick as he can where he's up a bit. Instead of that, Jackson flew off the handle, asked the court to help him. Well, it made a very bad impression, and I don't know exactly how we got this going, but I think, well, I know. It's why I think he must have known in him that he wasn't all that good at that kind of. But the part of the Donovan strategy was to try to get Germans, mostly military Germans, to come out against other Germans. It was plain after a while to me that what he was doing was trying to get what you might call the field generals, the ones who didn't make up the fancy strategies, but who ran, was field generals, and those who were staff generals who thought up the wise stuff. And his view was that the generals who were out there in the field, they were just wonderful guys, and those who were around Hitler, who of course they would be for the body, were the ones who were really bad. And he made an effort to get the generals to come along and say things that would be helpful to the. Well, it was a shambles. It was utter shambles. He didn't get anywhere with that, and I knew he wouldn't. And Jackson, as soon as he got wind of what Donovan was trying to bring about, and he was chiefly talking to Goering and to Schacht. Well, I wanted to talk to those two. I don't know how far he got to actually talk with them. I don't think the written evidence that we have is very clear on all that. But there's enough of it to indicate that he was thinking very seriously of getting Goering to testify, and testify in a way that would turn against Germany, but would lay the blame on these guys. Well, I thought Jackson was exactly right in saying, we're not going to do that, we don't have to do that. That's not the way to do a thing of this caliber. This is not Brooklyn. This is doing a big thing, and it's got to be done in a big way. And for us to turn around and try to live on the Germans, to tell about Hitler and the Nazis was, he thought, and I thought, crazy.
Did you ever witness a fairly sharp exchange between Donovan and Jackson?
No, I didn't. The one time that I saw them together, nothing happened to make the sparks fly.
Yeah.
But it didn't, it was a rather dull meeting. It didn't approach the real problems. And as a matter of fact, I never got to know him very well. He asked me to come around and talk to him once, but it didn't touch on what we're talking about now. Jackson basically told him, look, nothing for you to do here.
Yeah.
Go away. And he went away.
I read a piece that you did for the Columbia Law Review many years ago on Nuremberg.
On Jackson, wasn't it?
It was more specifically on Jackson.
Yeah. Right.
And you say in it, Jackson delegated authority extensively, sometimes mistakenly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe we've already touched on that in one instance at least, but could you give me some examples of what you had in mind when you drew that conclusion?
I had story more than anybody else. Donovan had, by the time I got there, moved away and was sort of a big man who's sitting there by himself. Story, on the other hand, that Jackson put in is the major man to make things go and put everything in place and all. And he was the person that I had in mind primarily.
Yeah.
The things that, he started off after Jackson had made his big, wonderful speech by simply having a couple of his lawyers dump big piles of evidence without any effort to make anything come out of it. Maybe a few paragraphs to say that this says essentially, here are all these documents, and I don't need to read them to all you, but you could take it from me that they show this.
That doesn't fly.
And furthermore, he had only given the defendant lawyers 3 copies of what he was putting in. He hadn't had any Russian or French translations made, so that 4 of the judges couldn't follow anything. And the thing was a shambles.
Is this a man in over his head?
Yes, very much so. And the climax came when one of his lawyers was up there testifying, and the German lawyer got up and said, Your Honors, we don't have these documents. And what's his name? The presiding judge?
Lawrence.
Lawrence asked Story what the matter was, and Story said they haven't been able to give the documents to all the defendants, and then it came about. Another question came, and another remark came from one of the German defendants. But, Your Honor, the press got 200 copies of this. Well, one of the few times when there was a great burst of laughter, and Lawrence didn't try to cut it off.
Yeah.
Almost always he would cut it off, and he was a wonderful man to run that place. He wasn't very bright. But he had the poise, and he knew how to run a court.
Yeah.
He would never have produced a wonderful piece of legal writing. He was awfully good at what it was that.
What was the attraction initially, if you know, of Story to Jackson? Where did all I know is that supposedly when Jackson was still in Washington, Story had come to the Supreme Court to see him on some matter, and picks him up. But
I've never found anything that cleared that up entirely for me. I do think that there was something there that indicated that they had met through somebody else a little bit before that, but not much.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Story was overseas a good part of the time. But there was something that put them together. And Story was a colonel, full colonel, and when he got out, Jackson immediately took him and put him in Paris along with Amon and several of the others who did the work of getting the evidence. And Story and Amon, Jackson had thought first that he was going to get all the evidence he wanted right in Washington. Well, it wasn't so. There was some good stuff at the State Department, but not a big bundle, just some good stuff. And Story and Amon, much as I think both of them were subject to less than I would want, they did make a very good job of getting the evidence together. And when Jackson finally decided to leave London and go there, they found Story there. They found Gill there. They found everything ready for him, and he got the impression that Story was a very, very good man to run things, and in a way he was, but the things that were half decent were so messed up with stupid things that he just didn't see at all. I don't think he really thought anything beyond Jackson and the lawyers that were under him, and what are we going to do here? And it never would occur to him to say, well, there are two Russians up there. He didn't like the Russians, needless to say. And he just didn't think that it would have to be. I had a good relation with Jackson, but it did not fit in at all with the Story business. That's a more complicated matter. Frank Shea, that name mean anything to you?
Got it down here for the next question.
Oh. Well, Frank and I were old friends. Frank was a little older than me and a little more senior in his where he'd gone in the state in the federal. He had become an assistant Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General, one of about 6, I guess. But I had worked for him at the AAA. I had worked for him in the State Department, in the Justice Department, and then I went off on my own, more or less, but continued to be friends with him. But he stayed in New York, in Washington, and I went overseas early in 1943. So I didn't see him for a long time at all. But when I came back, I found that Frank had already become the number 2 or number 3 man for Jackson. I think number 3 man would have been more accurate. What were we getting into here? What did you ask me?
Well, you were, we'd start out...
If I got involved in making that,
yeah,
a wonderful thing.
right.
Well, Frank could be very annoying sometimes. I got along with him very well, and he was a very good friend of Jackson. Jackson liked him very much. But he tended to think that after this guy's Story and these other guys were beneath him, and they didn't like him a bit. And they never thought, wrongly, they never thought the idea of economics as being involved here. And they thought that was for the birds, and Frank was running the economic side of it. And when Frank came back from he was still very much in Jackson's good graces. We had that meeting in Berlin when the court came over, and Jackson didn't want to wait any longer because he didn't like the fact that he was being held doing that much. So he just went back to Nuremberg and left Frank in charge. So he still had full faith in Frank. But in the meantime, Story and Abram were building the nest down there in Nuremberg. Frank wasn't there. He hadn't been there before because his father had died and he'd been away for almost 3 weeks. And I think the fact was that Frank wasn't on tap when the whole thing was being put together. Neither was I. I was first stayed in Washington when they went to London, and then I went to London, and when they went to Nuremberg, he told me to stay in London and keep the county. But I think, therefore, that Jackson gets there, and nice cushiony thing has been everything. He's got a wonderful house. We had some very good young lawyers. Everything seemed good to him, and who's done it? Why, it's mostly Story. And Frank, he's a fine guy, but he wasn't there. And when Frank came back and found that everything was working for Story to be the number 2 almost, he didn't like it a bit. And he had good reason not to like it a bit, because a number of the people that he had obtained to join us were people who worked for Frank many times and come over for him. And Story very cavalierly said those guys who report to me, well, Frank and several others were tried by this. And I think that Jackson came to the conclusion that there wasn't room for both Story and Frank Shea. And the fact was that the evidence had been gotten by Story and Abram, and they knew all about it. They had gotten it. They had stacked it. And he just thought that he couldn't get along without them under that circumstance. And without telling Frank that he thought the less of him, he said, look, Frank, you just can't get along with them, and I can't get along without them, and I don't see anything possible except for you to go back. And I wish you well in every respect, and I'll do everything I can to get you good things to go in Washington. But I think you've just got to do that.
Another early figure there, I'd like to have your reading of his strengths, weaknesses, his place in the trial, Mr. Sidney Alderman.
Ah. I'm laughing. He was such a wonderful combination of softness and a very good lawyer's mind. Well, I liked him very much. And we got along very well. We were both musical. And at that time, I played the piano not too badly. I got arthritis, what you call it, in my thumbs, and I don't play the piano any longer. But he loved to play the violin. He played quite well. I had a interesting. Alderman had pretty well healed, and he had always wanted to have a Baroque violin, an Italian Baroque violin, and he already had been looking for the big store there and all those things. There were 2 of them there that you couldn't tell which was the better. Well, I've got a very good ear, and I came down and listened to him play these 2 violins, and in fact, they're both good, but his name's not Frank, but Alderman. Sidney Alderman, yeah. Sidney, they're both very good, but no question in my mind is this one. Said, you know how much it just cost me? £300.
Where did this happen?
happened in London. Well, a lot of people have, well, I say a lot of people, I think both the Toozes and Connaught rather say that Alderman wasn't very good. But I think they're all get along. He was on his feet a long, long time. But he was doing exactly what the court wanted him to do. He was putting in the evidence in a way that they could understand as they came in. He had a lot of evidence that was very rich and exciting to hear it read. He had had 3 very good younger lawyers help him put it all together. Story had expected that he could do that in 2 hours. This was the best stuff that we put in, that showed exactly how all those wars had happened, and the Germans having done that. I mean, these were aggressive wars, and could have been better done. I read through the stuff that Biddle left in Syracuse. And you may have noticed there that when Alderman got up and started to talk, he had dressed himself as if he was talking to the Supreme Court. He had the same kind of regalia on that we were still then supposed to put. Very, very fancy. And Biddle put in his letter to his wife that Sidney Alderman started the day and handled himself very well. And he did. He started by talking about homes.
Yes.
And Biddle, of course, had been a secretary of the Homes. So that he just loved the idea of quoting Holmes. We're talking with a bunch of foreigners, and here we're at home again. So that the upshot of all this was that I think that he did exactly what was called upon to do. Now, after that, he was a very tired man. He liked to drink a little too much. He loved to have an evening with plenty to drink and the violin. But he had gotten very tired, and and Jackson just said, "Sidney, you've done wonderful, but you need to rest. Go home and rest. Don't come back until you feel it." Well, he came back, but there was nothing left for him to do. And he started to drink too much, and I guess he stayed there about 2 months, 2 or 3 months. I was living with him again. I was very fond of him. And I thought he'd done exactly right. And when he went back, he stopped drinking pretty well. He went back to the Southern Railway. He became the leading lawyer for the Southern Railway. He was very able.
Approximately when did he leave Nuremberg?
I think it would have been April or May.
Could you describe this regalia that he
It wasn't
attired
any
himself in?
unique regalia, but when we went to the Supreme Court, before they made it simpler, we went in with tail coats and bow ties. Now you just have to have a good, regular...
But he dressed in that fashion for his appearances before the court.
Yes.
Was he the only one?
I guess so. Of course, a number of us were still in uniform, and there were a number who had not been, who were just ordinary. Well, the first thing that Jackson put on paper and said I should do was to be the liaison man with the Russians. Well, that was interesting, but it was not a full plate at all. And the next thing I would have to say is that Jackson was a miserable man as far as making it so he hated administration. And what I did was start to understand how this thing was working. I went and watched some of the and Amon, of course, was in charge of that end of it. So I saw a lot of people whose names I knew and knew about, and saw them being examined by Amon, by others, and began to get an idea of what they looked like, how they answered, and so forth. But I hadn't been told to do anything. And I wasn't for a couple of weeks, I guess. And then Jackson made it clear to me that what he wanted me to do was to take over the general staff and high command. Nobody else wanted to. And I guess nobody else could have either. He picked me because he liked some things that I'd done. He knew, provision that the indictment was to include the general staff and high command was not put in until the very end of the work on the indictment, by which time it would all be, it was going to the end of October, I guess. And Peter Calvacresi and I had worked up the stuff that's in that, with respect to the general staff and high command. I might tell you, which of course is in my book and all, that I was very much of two minds about whether this is a good idea or not. What happened was that Jackson simply got on the phone one evening when Sidney Alderman was there, and told Sidney Alderman that he did not want us to sign the indictment unless it contained a provision with respect to the general staff and high command. So it was an order, but that was all he said. I mean, he didn't give me or Peter Calvacresi. Does that name familiar to you?
Yeah, I've read his book.
Yeah. He and I were together during the war in the intelligence stuff. He didn't give either of us any inkling of why he was telling us this now. And that, of course, confronted us immediately with what kind of a thing are we going to do here? It was obvious that he wanted the idea of the general staff to be in it. And the first problem was that the general staff wasn't anything like what it had been in World War I. It was wholly different and not nearly as important a thing. And I guess that's the answer. He, very shortly after I got there, it must have been a week or 10 days at least, when he told me that I was going to be responsible for that.
Did you do anything about the earlier assignment to liaise with the Russians?
Yes.
So let me back up just a little bit before. Why did you get that job? Did you speak Russian?
No. He had given me the job to be the representative on the Russian part of the indictment.
Yeah.
Of course, the Russians were there and were doing it too. But I represented. Jackson had gone on to Nuremberg, and I was left there at first with Alderman, then he went over too. But I was representing the Jackson as far as that portion of the indictment was concerned that contained France and Russia. France had been Sidney Alderman's bailiwick, but he'd left.
Yeah.
So I was doing both France and Germany and Russia over there. And I guess he remembered that because he did the same thing when Sidney and I got to Nuremberg. He was liaising with the French, and I was liaising with the Russians.
So what did you do about the Russians? I mean, did you go pay a call on them, or how did that early assignment work itself out?
Well, I had met the Russian.
Rudenko?
Rudenko.
Yeah.
I met him in London.
Yeah.
you see, so it was not something new. Therefore, there didn't really have to be any great thing about it. I went and saw him again. What it was.
That is Thomas Dodd.
At the outset, appeared to be a senior and important man, but especially after Shea had left, Dodd became not as prominent as Story or Heyman, but pretty close to it.
Yeah.
At that time, for quite some time, I didn't really know much about him. I knew he'd been in the Department of Justice, but what he'd done and what leverage he had or what his abilities were, I don't know. The first time that I noticed him particularly was when Ben Kaplan and I went to see. Ben and I were going looking at these quite a bit, and we saw on the bulletin board in the morning that Mr. Dodd was going to examine the head of the German army, who Brauchitsch. He was going to examine Field Marshal Brauchitsch. Well, I'd been working in intelligence, military stuff a great deal, and I want to see that for sure. So Ben and I went up and sat down. We were there about 5 minutes early before Dodd and his interpreter came in. And we sat down and we noticed that there was a very youngish man standing on the wall near us. I took a look at him and wondered why he's here. Because he was not the guard. He was not the guard. Well, in came Dodd and his interpreter, and they sat down, and to my astonishment, the first thing that the Dodd did was have this young man sit down. And the next thing the Dodd said was, "You are Field Marshal Brauchitsch, are you not?" Well, it was his son. But you know, anybody would have known that this was no 60-year-old man. So I rather put in my box that that was kind of dumb. However, he wasn't all that dumb. I heard him. He did a great deal of court work, as you probably know.
Yeah.
And if I were doing this in numbers or letters, I would say he was at least a B, maybe a B plus even.
Yeah.
He's pretty good. When Jackson went back, and it was quite during the summer of '46, he hadn't resigned yet. He'd be going back to the court, and he left Tom Dodd in control. I never had any trouble with Tom Dodd. He was running the show there, but nothing to do with my coming activities. So it didn't bother me in any way. But I never got to know him well, and all I could say was that he handled himself thoroughly well.
Colonel Harlan Eamon.
I did find out afterwards that he hated me. I never knew that. But somebody who ran into him 4 or 5 years after we'd all come back from Nuremberg was talking to him about Nuremberg, and somehow or other the guy talking to him made use of my name, and apparently Eamon said, "Don't name that to me again. I don't want to hear that man's name." Well, I'd be damned if I know.
You don't know what you did to her.
I don't know what I did to him. No. I did. I mean, he also drank too much, and he didn't seem to. The things that he thought were funny didn't seem to be funny at all. and I didn't think that he was very sharp about the interrogating that he was in charge of. The thing that pops into my mind has to do with during what's the second man? The one who was so
Yes?
Hess, yes. This is very early on in Nuremberg, and Hess has said that he can't remember anything at all, and has been sticking to it. And Eamon has been doing one thing after another to try to see if they can't wake him up. He gets Goering up to talk to Hess, and Goering does this and apparently makes a sincere effort to try to see if he can't get Hess to remember without any success. That stays as it is for a little while, and then the other Donovan, Jimmy Donovan, who was in charge of all the work of pictures and all that sort of thing, shows to all of us one of those things that the Germans put together, showing how life was like under the Nazis, of the big men. And we all see it, and we know what's in it. And then Eamon gets the idea that, we showed that to Hess, that wake him up. Well, now, I never had this kind of work of trying to get stuff out of people, but I knew people during the war who did that, and I knew something about it. And I knew that if you were trying to get some prisoner or something to tell you something you want to know, and the best way to do it is to have somebody who's acquainted with this, who has the language and can talk directly to him, and not have it to go to him. And also just two people there at most to get saying all kinds of things and getting him interested and getting him so he wants to show that he knows things. And that way you can often get things out of him without having to beat him on the head. Well, when I heard that Eamon was going to do this, I wondered whether he would do it the way that I thought I knew would be the right way to do it. That would be to have somebody who can talk to him directly and nobody else go through that with him and see if he can't get him talking about it. Well, instead of that, he tells everybody who's interested in this to come and he must have had at least 30 people in the room. And he sits himself down beside Hess, and they put it on the screen, and it goes through and comes to an end. And Eamon leads over to Hess, gets an interpreter to say, "Well, did you remember anything?" "No." That's the whole story.
I get a sense from talking to others that Colonel Eamon liked to adopt a kind of tough guy, Mr. DA, Mr. District Attorney manner. Is that your...
Well, I don't know that I ever noticed that particular thing. He did insist on being treated as one of the very top people, and of course, all right, he was.
Yeah. How does he relate to Colonel Story? Are they rivals?
They seemed to get along fairly well.
They did.
Of course, they would work together in getting all the stuff in. And, they seemed to get along pretty well, as far as I can tell.
When we get to the charge of aggressive war, I was astonished at the amount of time that was spent in the preparation of documents and in the actual courtroom with Austria and Norway. It would have seemed to me, far more dramatic and egregious Poland, the Low Countries, but particularly Poland. Is the reason that so much emphasis is given to Austria and Norway as contrasted to Poland because the Russians' hands are dirty? You can't. Was that discussed as a factor in determining how much attention?
Well, I would have to separate Norway and Austria. It's true that both of them are small countries, but from the legal standpoint, the two were very, very different. Norway, only 3 million people, I know, but quite large. But anyhow, the matter was, how are we going to get Rader? And Rader, except for his activities with respect to Norway, about the only other thing that ever came up on him was that while he was still the Grand Admiral, one of the what was that business when all the enemies that came ashore to try to break things or
commandos, saboteurs.
Yes, the commando order.
Right.
Apparently, while Rader was, I think in 1943, just before he turned over to Dunitz, there was an episode in France near the shore where there was naval people there. That one of those guys that came across it from Britain was shot under that law, and therefore that could be pinned on Rader because he was still the man in charge, and he had sent the command of order around to his major subordinates. So there was that one thing, but beyond that, there was really nothing on Rader except Norway. Well, no, I'll take that back. There was more in the sense that he had been the chief naval person since 1928, and that he therefore had been privy to he was present at all of Hitler's big statements. So there is that too that I should have thought of. But beyond that, the Norway thing, plus his having been in the occasions when Hitler had said what he was going to do, there was very little on Rader except this one thing.
Second World War, in the case of aggressive warfare, the most glaring one is Poland, because it launches the war and it's clear-cut aggression, yet more attention is given to Norway and to Austria, and I thought, well, that must be because the Russians' hands are not clean here and they're on the court, so you can't emphasize Poland too much, because then you get into the non-aggression pact, the fact that the German...
The Norway was split between Sidney Alderman and one of the British. That had been arranged beforehand. Sidney Alderman took the major part, but after all, it had to be something for poor old England to do, and therefore they took the last part of Poland and Norway and the Low Countries. I don't think it's true that Poland was slighted, because I know that both Alderman and one of the British, I can't remember which, but I have a feeling it was Fife, but one of the British, both landed on Poland, and I thought it was going into pretty fully. And of course, later on, when we were putting evidence in, we put a lot of evidence from, what was the name of the chief person on Plato's staff. Canaris, yes. Canaris left documents that Lahusen put in, and that were very important on Poland. I think the reason that a lot of time went there was two things. One was that, of course, literally, Austria was not a war, and therefore could be argument about whether laws of war applied because of that. And a good deal of effort was spent making it that there were warlike activities involved. The second one was that so many of the defendants were involved in this. Goering, Seyss-Inquart, and Papen were all deeply involved in this. And especially with Papen, where the evidence was weak, to build it up if possible, to get a better possibility with Papen. I think that's why there was so much of Austria.
Your case against the General Staff, everything I've read or everything that's been told to me concludes that this was a very brilliantly presented prosecution. It is not one, perhaps it couldn't be one. Did you feel any great emotional letdown after that presentation and its outcome?
Of course, I had two presentations. I had the one in January as part of the organizations. And then I had a concluding thing later. Well, I went through quite a change on that. I had been of uncertain mind about the whole business of the organizations from the very beginning, but unlike Biddle, who from the very beginning went further and at one stage would have liked to cut the whole thing out, I'd been told to do this. I'd been in the Army for some little time, and I found the matter interesting. I was told to do it, and I went ahead to do it. Yes. Ben is here. Now, I had very good help on that. Peter Calvacresi, very brilliant. He'd been involved in this kind of stuff longer than I have. He had throughout the war, and I hadn't gotten into it until 1942. But anyhow, he brought, you see, 4 other Britishers who were very good, and we got a hold of 2 very good interrogators. So that I was astonished when they came and brought me those statements by Brauchitsch and the others say that the thing that had been prepared depicting the status of everybody in the German army. Brauchitsch and the others came very close to saying that this was indeed a group. However, my mind about the thing in general, not only my thing, but the whole business of the organizations, I began to think about more carefully when I was asked to take over when after Jackson went. Because the way that Jackson looked at it and Bernays looked at it was, this was a vehicle for trying, thousands of people And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, I don't really see how that can be done. After all, the charges are going to be quite serious, and you couldn't just say that you were a member, and there's no doubt that you were a member, that you wouldn't have to. That you could then stick it in the hoosh ground, or worse. So I became, after I thought it over a little bit, and increasingly uneasy about being confronted with this myself after Jackson left. Well, then came the, the Deus Ex Machina from Berlin. The chief lawyer for General Clay, can't think of his name at the moment, came to see me and subsequently sent me a letter and told me all about what was going to take place with denazification. I said, well, thank God. That's a much better way to deal with these people than for me to do what here. So I, in substance, told that to Jackson. But he didn't go along with it. A few weeks after that, he and the other chief prosecutors had that get-together, that meeting before the tribunal discussing all this. And both Jackson and Fife took quite what I thought was a very dangerous position on this, that yes, indeed, we really mean this, that if they were members of these organizations and knew it, they were guilty. Well, now, the result of that was that I also stand the situation. I don't think that was a group or whatever. Therefore, I was not going to drop it. I was not going to let Jackson down. But what I decided was that the thing that I must try at all costs to get is not a decision that this is a criminal organization, but that this tribunal doesn't get going and say that the German generals were not criminal. I wanted to put it in a situation where, all right, if I'm not going to get what Jackson wants, that I don't want to get a lot of stuff about how the German generals were good and all that sort of thing, because they weren't. And that worked out, as you know, very well. So no, I really had already come to the conclusion that I wasn't going to win it the way Jackson wanted me to win it. And essentially, I didn't think it was going to make any difference. There are only 120 generals involved in this thing. And it would be much better to have real trials of them. And, that's what I would have wanted to do. So, no, I slid through that pretty well. There's no doubt that after that sting from Goering, that Jackson was not in evidence in the court any like what he had been before. He did, however, cross-examine Schacht and Shea. So he didn't desert the ship. But I think he was a very uneasy and upset man for quite some time afterwards.
Mr. Jackson did cross-examine Shea, and I must say I was struck by his solicitude for Shea in his cross-examination.
I think that he probably thought that if he tried to bite into Shea, that this is a very able guy. And furthermore, there are a lot of people here who now think that he's worth saving. And furthermore, he may well feel that he'll get more out of Spare by talking to him like a gentleman than trying to push him down. There may have been a combination of feelings that I don't believe I'll get along very far if I bite into Spare. And of course, there are ways of doing it. Really, the case against Little Alcohol was just about the same.
I must say, tipping my hand, that I think that is a real case of class distinction. One guy hanged because he had bad manners.
Yeah. Well, spoke bad German.
The other guy was equally guilty, and he gets 20 years.
Yeah. He, of course, also examined Schacht, whom he did undertake to bite into, but he didn't get very far.
Yeah. In his close, Jackson says there are 3 points that have to be proved. Number 1, that crimes were committed. Number 2, that they were part of a conspiracy. And number 3, that these are the people who committed them. Well, I can understand 1 and 3, but why is it important to prove it's part of a conspiracy? All of the people who were convicted on complicity anyway. Why was it so important, this difficult case of conspiracy? What was the importance of it?
Schacht. Because Schacht had acquitted in 1937. And it could only work, really, on that basis. To some extent, that might have applied to Poppin as well. But Poppin looked to me like a going goose. I mean, that he was going
right.
That he was going to get acquitted as soon as I really got into it. So.
Did you feel that from the outset all of this attention given to proving the conspiracy case was worth it?
Well, again, if one wanted to get shot, and see, especially after Cook was out of it, Schacht was the closest thing to an economic devil. And whether he was making it up or whether it was true, Jackson repeatedly said that it's unlikely people in the United States will not tolerate having a thing like this without having somebody out of the big corporations and so forth. Of course, Schacht wasn't really that either, but he was the closest thing to being a mogul and money. And it was a difficult one at best because it was being ousted in 1937 and then 39. I heard once Jackson say that if you can't convict Schacht, you can't convict anybody else out of the corporate world, which I thought was absolutely moral, terrible. I mean, no basis for it at all. You pick a guy who leads it in 2 years before the war comes. You pick a guy who was put in jail by the Nazis, and you say that he's the best guy who got. It was just weird. But that's another thing like Jackson. He gets wound up to a point where we've got to get this shot. And then he starts to say things that just won't wash it all.
Well, he thinks that Biddle was against conviction of Schacht.
Well, that wasn't so.
No, because I've seen the Biddle papers.
Yeah.
But they're not too happy with each other by the end of this experience. Jackson and Biddle.
No. They reconciled considerably after it was all over, but I think the flavor lasted.
Because I read some of the letters of Biddle's back home to his wife that are rather biting about Bob Jackson.
Oh yes, right. Well, especially after the the debacle with the Goering. But there are others too that
Right.
Yeah, Bill was a funny guy. He likes to puff himself up to his wife. I'm really running everything.
That's right. That's right. He's telling Lawrence what to do and how to think.
Yeah. And I liked him. And the tribunal as a whole was a strange bunch. If you took all of 8 of them at once, I don't think they'd go much above a B minus.
Really?
There are several of them that were much better, but I think that the one who had the most common sense was Bill's under
Parker.
Parker, yes. He was of course, he had narrowly escaped being on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Should have been. So other people have thought very well of him, obviously, and he told too many Southern jokes. He was that kind of a guy. Something rather lucid that way. But when it came to thinking what would be the best and the sensible thing to do in this problem, I thought he had the best sense of anybody else. But he would never have been anything like as good a guy as the British gentleman who ran the whole thing.
He really has a judge's temperament.
Yes, yeah.
But I'm going back again to this conspiracy thing has bugged me since I started this, because you say Jackson still is pressing for it as a way of nabbing shock, but it's part of the original Murray Bernays strategy back in '44 when he writes this memo. And I'm saying to myself, what if you can prove these guys committed acts? What's the point of having to prove that they conspired as well?
Well, I think that Murray Bernays didn't put it in to make more easy getting the goods on the Nazis. What he was trying to do with that was to lay the basis for charges covering the period 1943 to 1946, 1933 to 1939.
I see. Okay. Tell me how you got your star.
Oh, well, I went into the Army as a major in 1942 in the part that had to do with secret code decoding. And I stayed in the Pentagon building only for 6 months to be given sort of, not that I could become a wizard on break these things, but that I could have enough knowledge of them so that I could administer it. And I was sent to England in '42, about April. And my task was initially to set up a channel so that all of the British successes with the German codes, the fruit of this would be sent back to New York so that they would have it too. And then Bill, my superior officer in the States, and Billy Friedman, who was the big man on this, but by that time was old and somewhat weak. The three of us went over there to break the ice and get set with the British in this stuff, and the other two went back, and I was left to continue the relationship. Well, it soon appeared to me that the British would very much welcome some bright young American officers or civilians who they could meld into their people. They were getting tired, and fresh blood that was good enough to handle this stuff that was coming out from the decoders. would be a very good thing. And so I started that. And pretty soon I had 8 or 10 there who were working under me. Well then, so the D-Day is D-Day, what is it, D-Day?
The invasion.
The invasion is coming, and there are going to be a lot of new headquarters, high headquarters, and we want to be able to send this stuff to the American high headquarters as well as it's already going to British. And this is a rather complicated thing. The stuff that is being sent from Bletchley out to the British headquarters is very carefully guarded. There are special channels between BP and each of the places they want to feed with this because if the Germans get anything about it, it's going to blow up in their faces. Well, I could just see a new big headquarters of Americans come plowing into France or wherever it might be, and some lineys come up and say, we're going to put up a net here, and we're only going to tell this guy and this guy and this guy who can see it, and we want you to support us. These books want us. In other words, that it would be desirable to do two things: to go to the top people of each of the American high places and explain to them what this is, and explain that we're going to be sending some crackerjack young officers who will receive this stuff and explain it so that you can make use of it safely and well. Well, I went back to the Pentagon building for a general briefing in the winter of between 1943 and 1944, and I told my superior that I thought that this ought to be done, and he said that you're exactly right, and he went immediately to General, who was the Chief General?
Eisenhower?
No, in Washington.
Marshall.
Went immediately to Marshall and told him the whole story, and Marshall said, that's absolutely right. And the two of them put together I had sent a memorandum describing this, and they bought it, and the result was that they got a hold of a bunch of very, very good, almost all young lawyers. Funny thing, the British had hardly, they had only 2 or 3 lawyers in all of BP, and we had most of the lawyers. But anyhow, these guys came over, and they came up to BP, and they had about 6 weeks of training on this, and then sent them out to the various headquarters. What did you ask me?
Well, I was asking you how you got promoted to general at such an early age.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, that went well. Yeah. And I was promoted during the war as far as I was a colonel.
By the time you get to Nuremberg, you're a full colonel.
Full colonel, yes. And I had been for a year before.
Yeah.
And I would have stayed there, but for the fact that they came around and said they wanted me to follow Jackson on doing these other things. Well, at that point, I had to decide whether I wanted to take off the uniform, which I could perfectly well do, and which paid $10,000, which at that time was an awful lot.
Sounds good.
Or whether it would be better to stay in uniform. And thinking that I was going to have a lot of administrative things to do in a military environment, that I would probably be better to stay in uniform and, if possible, to get a star on.
Yeah.
And I had a good deal of clout on this because they first asked Donovan, Bill Donovan, and following him, Frank Shea, if they wanted to do this. Neither of them did. I was going to have to stay on it for least a year, and maybe more if I was going to do this. So I said that I would not do it unless they would do two things. One, give me a start, and secondly, enable my wife and ultimately children to come over to Germany. Well, they did both.
And as of what day are you General Taylor?
It would have been April of 1946.
Did you sense men go to West Point, they spend a lifetime in the military and don't make general? Was there any resentment among military types?
Well, of course, in Nuremberg, there was only one other. By the time I was in charge, there was only one other general there, and that was General.
Gill?
No, he'd gone.
Watson?
He had preceded me. Yeah, Watson.
Watson.
Yeah. And we were very good friends.
Yeah. Okay.
So I didn't have that problem. I was well aware when it came to be 1947, and especially in 1948 and 49, that the whole political arena was turning around violently. We weren't getting anything like as heavy penalties.
Yeah.
And furthermore, after the Czech business particularly, a lot of people began to get awfully nervous that there was going to be war with the Soviets, and women, wives were going back to states and that sort of thing. And the whole attitude toward what I was doing in Nuremberg began to get less flattering. So I did, not so much because I'd been made a general, because by then I was 2 years, I'd been one for 2 years already, but it was that this crowd shouldn't be doing what they're doing anymore. We want to get the Germans on our side. That was the change that took place.
You went back to the States from Nuremberg in March of 46, I think, on the matter of bringing your wife back and maybe some other reasons. And I understand that Justice Jackson objected to bringing...
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, Jackson, from the very beginning in Nuremberg, laid down the rule that no wives, no children are going to come. And at that time, that was perfectly normal because wives and children were not welcome until just about March of 1946. As far as the Americans were concerned, the French and British got the wives over much earlier. But anyhow, the president had allowed Bill to bring his wife, and allowed Wexler to bring his wife over in the spring as a special favor. Bob Jackson was very annoyed at that. You read some about that, I guess.
But I'm curious as to whether his objection is solely on the grounds that this would distract the staff from full attention, or has he got another reason why he just as soon not have wives around?
Well, yeah, both. But anyhow, I had no trouble with, as soon as I got back to Washington, what was the name of the second, the assistant secretary? Anyhow, he understood perfectly. And furthermore, it became almost impossible for me to recruit new lawyers.
Sure.
They'd want to bring their wives with them.
Yeah.
So the very thing that Jackson wanted me to do, which is bring over a new bunch in this, would be almost impossible unless they could bring them.
Professor Taylor, do you remember a personal discussion with him on this matter of bringing your wife?
No. He knew that I was requesting this, but we didn't have any discussion between ourselves. I made it apparent to, as soon as I got to Washington, that these two things were necessary, and they both were done. And it so happened also that everybody else practically was able to bring their wives just at that same time. My wife went over on the first boatload of what they called dependent wives. And to distinguish them from wives that worked.
Yeah.
And she had a ball. The wives for both the general in Austria and General Lucius Clay were on that boat. The general in Austria, I can't remember his name, was a 4-star general. The General Clay was at that time a 3-star general.
Yeah.
And the wives of the regulars were always discussing whether one would be better than the other, whether it would be better to be a 4-star general in Austria or a 3-star general in Germany. And my mother laughed herself thick. My mother, well, my wife, thought it was awfully funny.
When you went, do you change your living quarters from the time you're there as a bachelor until your wife comes? Did you move?
Yes.
Where had you been living before?
I've been living with out in Dornbach, which is quite near to what's the city that's right next to
Fürth?
Fürth. Sure.
My
Yes.
German sweet.
And Dornbach is just a couple miles from Fürth. Yes, initially Frank Shea and the Alderman and I shared a house in Dornbach. And it was not far from where Jackson was, and a lot of other people had houses out there. Then, when Shea left, I got Peresi. What is he?
Peter Calvo
Peresi. But then he went back to be demobilized. He didn't come back again quite some time, and Alderman and I were the only two there. Then when I came back, my wife landed at the same time that I came by air. We were for a couple of nights in the Grand Hotel, but then they got a better house for Judge Burkett, and they gave me Burkett's house. But it was perfectly good for two people. Perfect. And I stayed in that, and I didn't move into Jackson's house until he'd resigned. And then I did move into Jackson's house.
About when would that have been?
Well, that would have been in late October of 1946.
I'm very interested in our prison commandant, Burton Andrus. I went over his papers recently, which are held by his son, who was a retired Air Force officer. And going through his logs, correspondence, I came across the fact that you had visited him some social occasion. I guess a party gave at his home and so on. I'm curious to know your reaction to Colonel Andrus.
I can't remember what you just told me.
Well, it doesn't matter. But
it doesn't matter, no. I knew him only slightly. There was something rather comic about him, but everybody told me who did business with him that he was essentially a kindly person. He was sometimes an awful fuss budget. He for example, one of the occasions when something new was going to happen, and this was toward the end, and a lot of women and wives and other people were going to be coming around to hear the end. I think it was the very last day, I believe, when the opinion was given out, and then the penalties were given. I noticed him going around the gallery, and if a woman was sitting like this, cross legs, oh pardon me, no cross legs for ladies, and things like that. He wanted everything exactly the way he thought it should be. And he was polite enough about it, but he meant business.
Yeah.
He certainly wouldn't qualify as a great brain, but I think he was. He didn't do too badly.
And he lost 3 prisoners.
Yeah.
One thing that intrigued me was that you were dealing, in preparation for the subsequent proceedings, you were dealing with a Soviet general who turns up dead with a bullet hole.
You think I did it?
I want to know what happened.
Well, I'm not sure that anybody knows. We know what the Russians told us.
Right.
That he accidentally discharged it into himself, but that there was no suggestion that this was a suicide. But God knows what happened. I don't know. The Russians were so in with themselves with everything.
Remember about this Soviet officer that in your dealings with? Do you remember his name? Anything else about the one who died? The one who was.
Oh, well, I remember his name. I don't remember it at the moment. I know where to fish it out. And he was the one. I did see him several times because it was this was during the period when there was considerable talk about having a second trial.
Right.
Not the ones that I was going to give separately, which were not, of course, trials, international trials. They're all entirely American. But Elwyn Jones from the British, I can't remember who the French, Dubost for the French, and me for the British, for the Americans. And this Russian were the four people who were sitting down to try to decide whether it was possible, and if so, who would be made the defendants for a second international trial. And I guess I must have been talking with him and the other two, maybe 3 or 4 times before suddenly I was informed that he had been killed by shooting a rifle.
While cleaning his rifle, trying to escape.
I'm sure he wasn't trying to escape.
It seems to be the usual cliche.
But of course, the thing that has interested me more about it, the very beginnings of the things, when you had Bernays and Stimpson and McCloy and so forth, that whole crowd are New York lawyers, and the big firms. It's very strange that also. Willie Chandler was another big firm New Yorker. And Bernays, although he wasn't quite in that crowd, he was also an able New York lawyer. And all that new stuff came piling out of about 6 people.
At one point, Jim Farley came over to Nuremberg.
Yes, he did.
And he's a political animal. I don't think he just goes anywhere just as a tourist. I talked to a fella, I think his name is Roger Barrett.
Yeah.
And I said, why do you think Farley came there? He said, I think he came there, and I said, I have some suspicion that he came there to talk to Bob Jackson about the presidency. You know anything about that? So?
No. I think it's a shrewd guess. Of course, an awful lot of people came there, rolling over there to see what was going on. A lot more came when I was running the show. And of course, we began to get the beginnings of McCarthyism toward the end. Suggestions that maybe 1 or 2 people on my staff were left wing or something of that kind.
But tell me a little bit about what you did for diversion there. You mentioned the musicals with Alderman.
Yeah, there was a great deal of dancing in the Marble Room. And when I first went there, I was not a very good dancer. So the first time I went back to the United States, I took some dancing lessons. And my wife danced very well. And so we had a number of very enjoyable evenings in the Marble Room. The food was not bad. It was not expensive. And to have a nice dinner and then go in and hear the music for a while and dance a bit. It was very nice. There were 2 pianos in the Justice's house.
Oh.
They were already there. They were not his. It was a big house. And they had two pianos. And as I say, at that time I was not as long as I played the clarinet, but not too bad. There were several people, including especially one whose name I can't at the moment think of, but he worked for General Leroy Watson. He was really the scout for telling what was going on here and there. He was only actually a first lieutenant, but he was given majors so he would have more éclat going around socially. So he would have really report well. He had a beautiful baritone voice, and a lot of evenings he would sing and I would play the piano. Later on, my little girls came over. They were, I guess, 5 and 7 by then. And they were born musically and loved to sing, so we had a lot of fun there. When there was time to spare, actually a good deal of the living there for me was a rush of work that I had to go back to after dinner, and did nothing but work. Well, we'd get that particular case launched, and there'd be a period when I was really had a lot of leisure, and it would be possible to get a bunch of friends and go down to Garnish or Jeffers Garden or someplace like that, do a little skiing, play tennis if it was time. At that time I was doing a lot of skating also. So there are a lot of things to do. We had a place called the I've got it in my book, of course. Anyhow, it was a place that we could rent for the night and have a good meal, and we could go there in a bunch, 20 or 30. And we occasionally did that. I guess that's about it. Sometimes I had occasion to go to Paris or somewhere else on business. The French at one time were not very willing to turn over potential defendants that I wanted. So I had to go to Paris and work that out, look them over. I made one trip to Poland. I made several trips to the British organization up in the north of Germany. I went twice, I guess, to Holland. I never went to Norway, but we also made, if we had new judges coming in, if we had people coming in that were interested in what we were doing, we'd try to give them a dinner that night. So it's fun.
When you, in the early days, when Alderman was there and you and he would play together, where would this take place?
Well, it began in London in the...
I see. That early.
Yeah. Well, the others had left, and Alderman was in charge, and then he left, and I was. But when we were both there together, what we were doing was interesting, but it didn't take all day. There was leisure time. And there was a piano in the building which housed the place where all the senior lieutenants and colonels and majors could eat there.
Oh, there's special mess?
Special mess for people of that rank. There was another mess where you could go if you wanted, but it was restricted to lieutenants and captains.
Yeah. And you play there on that piano sometimes?
Yes, yeah.
Would people get around and sing?
No, this was about it.
Classical music?
I went with Sydney, and we simply went by ourselves upstairs and played. We played the piano. We played the violin. I played the piano.
What music would you play?
We bought some music. We did a lot of Mozart. We did quite a bit of I remember the Mozart Fest. Can't at the moment say exactly what we had. We had some Beethoven violin music.
General Watson.
Yeah. Oh.
What kind of a guy is he?
Oh, a great guy. Montana. He was not he was not a prime scholar at Harvard Law School, but he was very good. He had very good ability to get things done, and people liked him very much. And he did go through a period of excessive drinking, but he cut it off and never drank again.
This is while he's at Nuremberg?
Yes. No, not while he's at Nuremberg.
Oh, or later?
Earlier.
Oh, early, before Nuremberg?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he came down, he was, I think, 2 years behind me. And he had been Justice Holmes's last...
That's right. Holmes died the year that he was clerking for him. Yeah. Well, this is a little quaint, but maybe you can clarify it for me. I read again and again about Hess sitting in court reading novels. This would seem to me to detract from the dignity and seriousness of the proceedings, to allow a defendant to sit there and read novels all day long. Why was he allowed to do that?
Well, nobody knew what would happen if he wasn't allowed to. I mean, here is a man that most people think is crazy. And you might scream and jump, you couldn't tell. Apart from the reading, he would get to what appeared to be great pains in his stomach, and he would go like this, and apparently be trying to, and then they would usually take him out.
Oh, this is in the dock. He would do that as well.
Well, it would happen to him, Doc, and they would usually take him out for a while, then bring him back and calm down.
Yeah.
Oh, I've said this in my book, that my belief after not more than 6 weeks in Nuremberg was that he shouldn't be tried.
Yeah.
Because it may be that he was not insane in the sense that the doctors, and they did say that he was insane, but the problem when you have a guy in a court, to me, is the question is whether insane or not, whether he is able to defend himself. And I simply did not think that he was had any ability to defend himself. Whitney Harris had, you know that name?
Well, I've talked to him. I've interviewed him.
Yeah.
He told me a good story about that.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. How he managed to get himself appointed as Justice Jackson's representative at the execution, but that when he showed up, they wouldn't let him in.
Yeah.
And he subsequently learned it was because Jackson had somehow offended the Army authorities, and they were going to get back at him by not letting Whitney Harris. You take on this enormous job of the subsequent proceedings. At the point that you are approached to do that, did it ever go through your mind, well, God, I've had a belly full of this stuff. I'm not sure I want to do this, or were you happy to take on that?
Well, actually, you see, this, I hadn't gotten there until October, and it was only December. It was only November.
Oh, was that soon that you knew?
Yeah. It was probably on November 80. It was either the day that the case began or the day after. I wish I could remember the name of he was the lawyer, the chief lawyer for General Clay, and he subsequently was the judge of the Court of Appeals down in Washington. He was a very, very able man, and I knew him well, and liked him, and he came and no, I hadn't had a belly full of it. Even if I hadn't done that, I would have counted on probably staying on to the next till closer to the end of
Right.
the war.
I hadn't realized that you get this assignment so early. I thought somehow it was much later in the game.
Yeah, I took it only after considerable thought, and also with the provision that I would be allowed to finish the business of the armies,
General staff.
Before I would be jumped on to do this. I did, in fact, have to do some things before, but I was left practically alone so that I could finish up that job.
At the Nuremberg trials, the IMT was very possibly flawed law, but pretty damn good justice.
Whether the law is flawed or not, the law utilized in Nuremberg was not of one piece at all. The parts called the war crimes, have a history of a couple of centuries. Far from being new. The first time it was internationalized was in the Hague Conventions, which themselves did go back to 1899. And there's other uses of it going back to the Civil War. That's when the first coding of these were made. So that part has always been, in my opinion, that's law. That's international law as far as you can have any international law. That's it. It was agreed upon by all of the major nations. Of course, international law is a very different thing. There's nothing in those Hague Conventions that says that anybody has got to do this, that they've got to penalize something, and there are no penalties.
Yeah.
No, it's not at all like a statute in ordinary criminal law. But it sets up certain standards and certain particular things which all the nations agreed should be and had been used. Used all the time for two centuries, practically. So that's what I would call a law that you can't really quarrel with. Now, when we come to the other parts, what you might call the Bernays, Chandler parts, of course, it's a different story. And I don't think you'll ever get the two sets of lawyers to agree on it. If you were of the view that you don't have law unless you had some kind of a king or Congress or something like that, which is the source of that kind of law, which is national or city law. You certainly will have great trouble with the things that came from Bernays and from Chandler. If you are more of the viewpoint, the ways that English law developed, most of English law starts out as what we call customary law. The customs rise because people begin to feel this necessity and that necessity. And the judges soak up these feelings that the people have. They begin to get written up by lawyers in England. And by, they begin to get into statutes too. But an awful lot of law comes out of customary views of things. And that was what was going on before it was codified in the middle of the 19th century. right here in New York, across the street. But what happened to Nathan Hale? A fine man. He's got a on the Yale campus and one right down here.
He's got another statue in front of the CIA.
But nobody that I can remember said that it wasn't right to hang him because he had been a spy.
No, but that's different. Right is different. The law is not always right. The law is not always just. That's the point that I'm trying.
And I was talking about whether it was law or not whether it was just law.
But
most people then thought that was perfectly just as well. What happened to the major for the British major, who was Major Andre. 5 of General Washington's generals were put in a row there to constitute the group that would decide whether or not he was to be hanged. They said, well, it's a pity, he's a very nice man, but our rule is that those who trespass in this way and aren't in uniform are to be hanged. They don't have to be, they could be shot maybe, but they would be killed. Because that is the rule, and that's the way the Army is, and the Navy too.
Well, I have no trouble whatsoever with the fate of the defendants there. I don't think there were any travesties of justice. I don't think anyone suffered who didn't deserve their fate at all. And to me, it was justice. But if I were just a hard-nosed legal scholar and not looking at this idea of a justice that is above law, I would say, what the hell kind of a trial is this where an American judge is judging a German in Germany for crimes committed in Poland? I would have jurisdiction problems. Now, I'm talking about that kind of mechanics of it. You could fault and flaw, but I have no trouble with the justice of it.
Well, a lot of people would not make that distinction. I agree with you that the distinction should be made. There's an awful lot of law which is real law and has been put on the books, which I regard as quite unjust. But it's very hard to say that that's not law if you take that it's been gone through the Congress and so forth.
All right, now let me try another one of my sweeping generalities and get your reaction. There was great hope at the time the Nuremberg trials were going on that it would serve the purpose of deterring aggression, that the instrument of war crimes trials would be applied against other perpetrators. None of that has happened. The world has not been a peaceful place. We've all witnessed a great deal of aggression since 1946.
Let me just propose, just bust it in one. If you're saying, looking at quite a distance from Nuremberg, there's been relatively little use of this, but think of the amount, in addition to this particular trial, that was done between 1945 and 1949. There must have been several thousand things that also rested on the laws of war. And I'm not saying just Tokyo and my own 12 trials. There were a great many trials that nobody knows anything about that took place in the Far East. People know about the big trial and about Yamashita. But that's all they know about. But there are gallons of other trials with very severe penalties. Some of them capital. And in Europe, there are many. Well, we had also the trials down at Dachau.
Right.
You know about
there were several people executed before the IMT.
Yes.
At Dachau. Yeah. But the point I was getting at is this: as I look at this expenditure of effort, and I say to myself, Well, what good came out of it? Well, it didn't deter war. It didn't result in a precedent of bringing people to trial for the commission of war crimes. The only benefit that I see of the trial, and it's a very large, important one, is to me, it placed on the record in an irrefutable way the Nazi era. And nobody can contest that what happened did not happen after this trial. And I see that really as the only real, provable value of the trial. Now, would you dispute that?
Oh, I think there are other values. I don't know that at this particular moment I want to sail into all that I've got in my book on that.
Yeah.
But I might call you. Have you read by any chance remember the article that Counsel made? It's in the DePaul.
Yeah, I know of it. I have not read it.
You haven't read it. I think you would find it. Actually, he's one of four of the defendant lawyers, or maybe it's six. I'm not sure. That put these things in the DePaul catalog. It's magazine, or whatever they call it. Counsel and Dr. Dix were probably the two best German lawyers there, and of the two, I would think that Counsel was the most the sharpest.
Yeah.
He takes a great many shots at this, but his value that he finds in them is altogether different from yours. It is essentially that although many of the charges may not have been proper, and he has a lot to say against it all, he ends it up by saying that so many bad things happened, not on the sea, to be sure, over there in Poland and places like that, that something had to give. I mean, you couldn't leave that kind of things standing with nobody paying any attention to it. You had to have this acknowledged, and that the trial did do, and it was a necessary thing. It did a thing which had to be done before people could get together again. Taken the view in my book that Zeiss-Inquart was a better man than he portrayed himself as. He took a very flat view that he would not say anything against Hitler. He said on his deathbed, his last remarks were that during the war he obeyed and marveled at Hitler, and now that things have turned the other way, who am I to say anything else? But Zeiss-Inquart, not to the same extent as Shea, but to a considerable extent, did the same thing, that when he realized that the jig was up, to try to prevent unnecessary continuation of things. And at one point toward the end, he made a very daring travel by fast motorboat all the way from Holland around to Kiel in order to consult Dönitz as to whether it would be permissible for him to do some more things that would be cutting off anything that he could prevent other things from happening. And Bernays invited him to stay, but he said, no, I will not. I will go back there because that is where I belong. I think he was a very, very great man. I thought Keitel's last words were very moving. Do you remember them?
Yeah, I remember the substance of them.
Yeah.
And my reaction was that Keitel comes out of this a more admirable man than went into it.
Yes. Yes, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. He began to see what he hadn't seen before. Yeah. Well, good luck with it.